Well, here we are back in good old Auckland. So you look down the street, one big mud flow all the way down here. Forgive me for saying this, but I think these go back to 1840, these foundations. Quite clearly the blocks go beneath the road surface. And once again the building is buried right a bit. So they say that most of the old front where Auckland stands is actually built on reclaimed land. So those bricks would have been fired up maybe 1860, and these rocks carved up by probably prisoners. So there was actually a few convicts shipped over this way too, actually. These rocks would have been brought from nearby. And look how they've come out of the furnace of hell, just like the rocks down in O'Reilly Point. Absolutely aerated, so I think we can presume they came out of Rangitoto, which is supposed to have been last blown up about 800 AD, which means that nobody was here when it actually blew up. However, the Maoris have plenty of stories of Rangitoto blowing up, so either they were here a lot longer than what people say they were, or Rangitoto has actually been blowing up quite recently. So I'm very suspicious of dating. I am suspicious of all of the dates, really. In fact, I don't really trust science very much at all. Like 4.5 billion years old is the planet, they say. Well, is that really going to be true or not? Considering that there hasn't always been a 24-hour day, and there hasn't always been a 365.25 year. All these things have changed. So the Maoris believed in Maui, and they have a story about Maui putting a rope around the sun and slowing it down. So obviously there was a time when the day got longer, and the seasons have not always been as they are now. And so I don't know how you would get perfect 4.5 billion years, or even a million years. And the seas have not always been where they are, and the continents haven't been where they are either currently. In fact, everything about this world comes under the heading impermanence. It's the thing, eh? Everything is impermanent. Well, some very strange people around in Auckland streets. And they kind of look at you funny. Everywhere else you go, people seem to ignore you, but not here. Pays to keep moving. Yeah, so I have reposted some videos I first made back in, I think it was 2016, about the Auckland buildings. Back then, before the you-know-what happened, people were raving on about mud floods, buildings, and resets, and sudden changes to society, which makes one wonder about the authenticity of history as we read it. So in New Zealand we get a combination of Maori history and British history. Basically, everything is being canonized to read exactly the way political wanters, for a better word, wanted to read. There were no stone buildings, and the Maoris only built with wood. The Maori's just one race of people. No different tribal groups. Even though it's well known that there were different colours and different hairstyles and different levels of being too. So it is presumed in New Zealand history, which is a very big presumption in my book, that no human being had set foot on this land up until 1,000 years ago. And that would mean that New Zealand has the shortest human history of pretty much any country on earth other than Antarctica. Yes, people get curious when they see you filming, eh? So, kind of makes Jack a very dull boy, that, you know. Because there isn't really much to look at in New Zealand, if all that is true. However, we do find that, for one thing, there were people here who actually made elaborate clothes, like specifically Greek Roman style. And these were very common, and they were made out of extremely fine material. So they were, I think they used flax. They had it down to fine flax, not just rudimentary flax. And they were able to dye lots of different colours. So, I don't know, it definitely looks very Roman and Greek to me. And people say that about the Vikings, how there's stone huts around up in the forest up there in Northland, up near Opanoni. Waipu Forest, is it? Apparently there's a little settlement in there. And someone pointed out that there were some Chinese shipwrecks up there on the sand above Opanoni, Hokianga Harbour. One guy reckons he used to play in those sand dunes and they were throwing the plates at each other, Chinese plates, which came from these shipwrecks. Two very large ships. Then you have this French explorer that turned up, the Dubious, who described the Maoris up north as quite easily passing for Frenchmen with long black hair and pale skin, and Apui. Look, some of the other Maoris down south, they look very Melanesian. And the little pygmy Maoris, the redheads, Papapaiuris, magic people. And there is the Kaimanawa Wall, of course, which is yet to be looked at. due to being of such terrible change to the formal history, they just don't want to touch it, eh? Like, it's obvious there's a megalithic wall there. So, I guess the other thing to remember about New Zealand is that it has been well and truly buried under one of the world's greatest supervolcanic eruptions 2,000 years ago. It's also buried the Kaimanawa Wall, by the way. So there have been some real big wipeouts. Might have been completely depopulated at one stage. Still the moa bird survived, and a few other things. So it couldn't have been a total wipeout. These gates, they've been here since 1860. Look how strong they built them. They never mucked around back in those days. They did a job, they did it. Not like now. What we have now is collapse, disturbed thinking, dissolution. I honestly say that everybody is getting a little worried, I think. Getting worried that one day a bunch of Chinese soldiers is going to come walking down the road and kick us all out of our homes. More and more rational to believe something like that could happen. Look at that for a dirty old ship. Need a paint job, girl. Wonder where it comes from. Somewhere in Asia. Yeah, so the New Zealand that I came to in 1973 has certainly changed a lot. And most of it is for the worse, I'm afraid. Yes, well, if there's one thing that is missing from Auckland, it's actually toilets. So I walked all the way down to the wharf there and found all those toilets have now been shut. And I thought, well, I'll use the ones in the train station, and to use those you have to have a train ticket now. So a lady was nice enough to let me in to use the toilet. Pretty important actually for people my age. Where was I? Oh, yes, we live in a land where there is only 1,000 years of human history, which is part of the official education system, I think. But there are signs that there have been other people around. So I have seen a few things which look South American. In fact, the real old stuff looks very, very Peru type thing, eh? There's a few bits in the Auckland Museum which look like they're Peruvian, but they're put down as Maori, but nobody really knows who brought them here. They're like masts of ships. Yeah, and the clothes that the Maoris were wearing some of them extremely elaborate and look like Roman togas, so we must presume that there's been a Roman influence here, or is it Greek or Egyptian? Maui, actually, the great explorer, seems to be very similar to a Greek god with his shape-shifting and his magical performances, as well as his wickedness sometimes. Maui comes across as being very similar to actually Zeus. And the Tahitians in particular looked very Greek, some of them. On some islands there appears to be a mixed racial balance of the darker people and the white people, all of which is recorded in history and is totally ignored, so I'm not sure what these universities do, when they make up all of these theories they have. They seem to dismiss a lot of evidence, and what gets taught into the schools is just somebody's point of view, actually. So I'd say that quite a few of the lithographs from Sidney Parkinson and Joseph Banks and others are actually totally ignored when it comes to formulating the history of this country, which is actually, because of all the politics, has kind of like become a country with no past, actually, when in fact, considering we had things here like the Moabed, obviously this is a very ancient land, right down here in the South Seas. I think they have the same kind of problem in Australia too. Quite a lot of things over there that don't really fit with the official version of what the history is. So the history of a land is a bit like the truth that's available in a war. Once a war starts, the first casualty is truth, and when there starts to be a political war, the first casualty will be historical truth, which is very sad. So lots of stuff gets buried because of politics. And it's getting worse, It's getting worse rather than better. Right, well, I think it's time to move on a bit further. Maybe I'll go and have a beer.